Russia-Ukraine war and also controversy relating to those Epstein files. But let's now look towards the Middle East. And UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has urged immediate action in Gaza, describing the situation as a moral crisis beyond humanitarian concerns. Speaking at Amnesty International's Global Assembly, he said over 1,000 Palestinians have died since late May trying to access food. Gaza's health ministry has reported that 122 starvation deaths, including 83 children with widespread child malnutrition, confirmed by the United Nations. Let's listen in now to Secretary-General Antonio Guterres.
Our own heroic staff continue to serve in unimaginable conditions. Many are so numb and depleted that they say they feel neither dead nor alive. Children speaking of wanting to go to heaven because at least they say there is food there. We hold video calls with our own humanitarians who are starving before our eyes. And this is not just a humanitarian crisis, it's a moral crisis that challenges the global conscience. We will continue to speak out at every opportunity, but words don't feed hungry children.
Well, the UN's World Food Programme warns that 90,000 women and children urgently need treatment for malnutrition. Starvation deaths in Gaza have risen, with 9 more reported on Friday, according to local officials. France and the UK have urged Israel to lift aid restrictions. In contrast, US President Donald Trump has called for Israel to escalate its military actions, saying they need to finish the job against Hamas. Trump's comments made during a private visit to Scotland signalled a shift away from negotiation towards further military confrontation. Trump also said that Hamas wants to die and Israel must take stronger action. Let's now listen to the President of the United States.
Hamas didn't really want to make a deal. I think they want to die, and it's very, very bad. And it got to be to a point where you're going to have to finish the job. They really, they asked for things. Don't forget, we got a lot of hostages out. So now we're down to the final hostages, and they know what happens after you get the final hostages. And basically, because of that, they really didn't want to make a deal.
Guterres, however, has called for a permanent ceasefire, the release of hostages and unrestricted humanitarian access to alleviate Gaza's suffering. Well, with us to discuss these updates, Yossi Kapawasa, an Israeli intelligence and security expert who's joining us from Tel Aviv. Yossi, as always, a pleasure to have you on the programme. Further condemnation from global players about the current situation in Gaza. This, of course, coming after overnight we had updates from Israel saying that aid would be allowed from international players through airdrops, as opposed to, of course, the more traditional route through. We know that there are tons of aid waiting at the borders. Do you think this move by Israel is to appease international players, knowing that the actual amount of aid that gets in won't be too substantial given the restrictions on planes and the amount they can carry?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And to the point, I would say that we all know that there is enough humanitarian aid provided to Gaza. It's not a matter of lack of supplies. The problem is with the distribution, and the distribution is not happening properly because of the UN agencies and because of Hamas. They do not distribute the aid. And then they complain that there is starvation and hunger. It's ridiculous. And when the supplies get in, Hamas takes them over and make sure that they would sell them in higher prices. That's what we are witnessing in Gaza.
Yossi, sorry to interject. I do understand what you're saying, but also the GHF have been distributing aid with confirmation and Israel allowing it. That has seen a reported over 1,000 deaths around these aid distribution sites and reports of the humanitarian situation surrounding hunger worsening. So it seems that the model that Israel's allowing isn't sufficient, and aid now being dropped by air, which surely will allow Hamas to at least gain some of that aid with no one monitoring where it's going and who's picking it up. The situation seems to contradict itself slightly.
No, the GHF, which is distributing aid under our supervision, is trying to give the aid to the Palestinians. What we see there is difficulties in controlling the big amounts of Palestinians coming to the areas where the aid is distributed. And in some cases, they were just running towards the soldiers that are overlooking the place. And they felt under threat, and something that caused them to shoot towards the air. And later on, they had to shoot in the legs of the people that were just coming close to them in a threatening mode. That was the case. What we are trying to do as GHF is to supply aid to the population. We brought millions of aid packages in order to supply it to the population. That's what's happening there. We don't bring them in order to get aid, in order to kill them. That makes no sense. That's ridiculous. What we are witnessing here is an orchestrated campaign by Hamas with the support of the UN agencies that are afraid that GHF is going to replace them as the distributor of aid. And they are embarked on this starvation campaign that can be solved very easily, by the way, if we reach a ceasefire. Hamas, as President Trump said, doesn't want a ceasefire, doesn't want a solution. And that's the case. We were more than ready. We made all kinds of unbelievable concessions in order to convince Hamas to accept a ceasefire that would have put up a solution to all these problems. Hamas refused to accept any of the ideas of the ceasefire, raising all kinds of demands that they knew that are unacceptable in order to make sure that there's not going to be a ceasefire.
Yes,
that's
absolutely.
where we're standing.
Yes, Yossi, of course, the situation around a ceasefire is extremely difficult. I just want to allude to the fact that it's the United States and Israel saying that there is enough aid, and there are many countries, many international Western countries saying that there isn't, along with over 100 NGOs and aid groups. That's what's on the table. That is what we are hearing. We can only go off that information. Of course, reporting in Gaza itself is limited because of restrictions on international journalists. So the situation is unclear, but the understanding, of course, is that Hamas getting hold of aid is detrimental not just to Israel's effort, but also a continuation of a war that is seeing a potential humanitarian crisis. Yossi, I quickly want to allude to that ceasefire before we do move on. Of course, talks now breaking down, US and Israeli delegations both leaving these discussions. Have we ever been further away from peace?
Well, we are in a low position in the efforts to reach a ceasefire because Hamas refused to the suggestions made by the mediators, including the United States, Qatar, and Egypt. And even Qatar is upset with Hamas now. So it's difficult to see how we can move forward, but we didn't lose hope. And we make an effort to resume the talks maybe this coming week. Now that Hamas realizes that if they do not accept the conditions, then there's an Israeli effort waiting for them that would remove them from power. That's what we are forced to do because they refuse to reach a ceasefire. We shall have to take a military action and remove them from power with force.
Yes, absolutely. Yossi, stay with us. We're going to stay on the topic as